Hi, it's Randy Herman with Everything Real Estate. I'm associate broker with Keller Williams Realty, and we're here to answer all your questions about real estate. Today, we're going over a topic that affects at least a fifth of the population, which is condominiums. And I have with me expert lawyer on the subject, Mark Rosen. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with condominiums as a law specialty?
Well, I've been in practice over 40 years, believe it or not, and about 10, 12 years ago, I had been doing a lot of commercial litigation, and literally through a fluke, a law firm that needed some litigation support in condominium law reached out to me and said, you know, could you help us out? And I said, well, I've never litigated condominium work, but I'd be happy to try. And lo and behold, now it's 12 years later, and I've been doing it ever since. So.
Okay. Well, maybe you could tell us, we'll jump right in and kind of define what is a condominium, because there's some confusion about condominium, co-ops, apartments, etc. So.
Well, a condominium is a statutory created interest in real property.
Now that sounds like a lawyer's definition.
Right. It means if it wasn't for a statute, there isn't such a thing as a condominium. Right. It creates your real property interest literally in a space. And it's defined in what's called a master deed, what you own and what is, quote, a common element owned by either the association or the trust for which you have a percentage interest in.
So, Mark, I'm a little confused. What do you mean by common areas?
Well, common area in a condominium depends on the type of building it is. So if it's an apartment type condominium, unit on unit, the common areas are the hallways, the foyer, the land around the building, any amenities like a swimming pool, a clubhouse, a tennis court, a golf course. It just depends on how big the condominium is. Right. If it's a townhouse style where there's either fourplexes or twuplexes, you could own some of the land adjacent to your unit, but it's probably a very small amount. And generally, again, all the land between the units, the roadways in the complex, etc., are what they call common areas.
So let me ask you, if something happens to this common area, am I responsible as a part owner?
You're only responsible to the extent of your percentage interest in the complex, and that percentage interest is set by the declarant or the person who develops the condominium. And there's some criteria that determines what the percentage should be. It's pretty easy. If it's two equal units, you're going to have a 50% interest.
Right.
If it's 100 units, you're probably going to have a 1% interest, and so forth. Sometimes, if a unit is much bigger or has a better view or something, they may have a higher percentage interest.
Right. So you had mentioned, I had mentioned townhouse, you mentioned stacked apartments. There's lots of different styles, right, of condos?
Yes, absolutely. Right. Like I said, there could be the duplex, fourplex. There could be several buildings that are one floor, two floors. It really just depends on the developer, what he determined to develop, or if he took an apartment complex or some sort of homeowners association and converted it to a condominium.
Oh, I see. So there's lots of different ways of coming at a condominium.
Yes.
You know, I was surprised when you sent me, actually I saw your original PowerPoint that you use when you're talking to other lawyers, and you had said that Mitt Romney was one of the first to come up with this?
But his, I believe it's a relative of his, was one of the founders of the concept of condominium back, I don't know, 100 or more years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you though, in order for me to buy a condo or a house, etc., I normally need a mortgage. So banks will lend on this kind of
Absolutely. Situation. Absolutely. You can get a mortgage. It's a mortgage on your interest, not only in the unit itself, but your percentage interest in the condominium's common elements and facilities.
Okay. And you had mentioned that condos need certain documentation, such as a master deed. Can you explain a little bit more about a master deed?
Well, a master deed is sort of the beginning document. That sets the land parameters, what's a condominium, what's common elements, what the percentages are, what kind of governance there might be if it's going to be through an association or a trust, and how you amend the condominium documents, the master deed, in terms of many condominiums are built in phases.
Right.
So,
and can condominiums be like mixed use, or are they just?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've represented both commercial condominiums and commercial and residential, where the first floor is generally some sort of retail space, right, and the second, third, or whatever number of floors is residential.
You know, it's interesting when I have buyers who are buying condominiums, and we're putting in an offer, we always put in a phrase, you know, all the condominium documents to be reviewed by, you know, the buyer's attorney, which in this case might be you, for example. And I'm always kind of curious because they will always put in the master deed, the seller has to supply those, and the rules and regulations and the bylaws. Now, what's the difference between the rules and regulations and the bylaws?
Well, there is a hierarchy of governance, and it starts with, believe it or not, the statute that creates condominiums, which is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 183A. That's the final say-so about what can happen in a condominium or not happen. The next thing is the master deed, which, again, sets the physical parameters of the condominium. Thereafter, depending on if you're an association or a trust, you will have a declaration of trust, and within which there will be bylaws, and then you could just have bylaws if it's an association. The bylaws tell you how many trustees or board of directors you're going to have, what their powers are.
Oh, I see.
What are common expenses, what aren't common expenses, what happens in a case of a casualty loss, and so forth.
And then the rules and regulations are?
Rules and regulations govern mostly how you can act within the condominium. Right. Whether you can smoke in certain areas, whether you can have pets in certain areas. Right. And that's also can be both in the master deed or in the bylaws, whether it's going to be age restricted, if there's going to be any restrictions on pets, and so forth.
Right. And we also are usually asked by the lawyers to supply or make sure that the other side supplies the financial documents. And what are they generally?
Well, you want to see the financial documents because the fiscal health of a condominium is very important. You don't want to buy into a condominium and the next month find out there's a special assessment of thousands of dollars because the roofs have to be replaced or whatever.
You want to explain a little bit about what's a special assessment?
A special assessment is a charge to a unit owner over and above the monthly common fee for the maintenance and operation of the condominium. And what you try to do in a condominium, a well-run condominium, has what are called reserves. It's almost like a sinking fund. Part of your monthly common fee will be paid into a reserve, and so that in 20 years when the roof needs to be replaced, there's actually a pot of money to do it. All of a sudden you don't have to say, gee, everyone gets assessed $1,000 because we have to replace the roof.
And I've seen in some of the deals amazing assessments that suddenly there's going to be an assessment of $20,000 or $10,000 because the driveway has to be redone. Or
right, the driveways, again, if you don't own the exterior of your unit, many times they have to do siding, decks have to be replaced, driveways, like you say, roads, etc.
And then we're often asked also to supply the meeting minutes, you know, the HOA, the Homeowners Association minutes, and why are those important?
Well, the minutes will tell you what happens month to month in terms of the governance of the condominium, the issues that that condominium is confronting in terms of its continuation and maintenance, its fiscal health, and so forth.
Right. So you review all these documents?
Yes, we review all these documents to make sure that they're up to date, that there's nothing peculiar about them that's unique to that condominium. I mean, I can tell a story about where one condominium's document said notice had to be by telegram and or a written letter. And there was a unit owner who was fighting a certain regulation, and she complained that she didn't get her notice by telegram, and therefore she didn't have notice. So you have to make sure they're not antiquated documents.
Okay, so now you piqued my interest. So how did that wind up?
Wound up that she got actual notice, that there was, fortunately the judge ruled that this is, modern times and it has to be read expansively, the provision.
Okay, so maybe you can sum up from your point of view, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a condo? Certainly from a realtor's point of view, I can say that they're usually less expensive because it's more common living, right? You don't have as many maintenance problems because someone else is generally, there's usually a management company, a property manager, et cetera, who's taking care of those things. You split the costs on repairs, so if your roof goes, everybody's contributing, et cetera. But from your point of view, what are the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, I think the advantages are that many condominiums, especially for the boomer generation, you get amenities you wouldn't have in a single-family home. You would have access to a pool, tennis courts, golf courses, gymnasiums, etc. Many of them even have restaurants, club rooms. You're not going to have that in a single-family home.
And I know, from my nephew, he loves his friends to be around him, so just having that more communal life for him is a big advantage.
Right, and as you said, I can't emphasize enough, it should reduce maintenance. You're not out mowing the lawn, someone else is. You're not shoveling the sidewalk, someone else is. Yep. You're not worried about replacing the roof or the electrical wires or any of the plumbing. That's all part of the condominium, depending on its size. There's generally a property management company that takes care of these things, and that's what your monthly common fee pays.
Disadvantages?
Disadvantages is communal living. You can't do what you want in your unit necessarily or in the common areas. You may not be able to smoke. It could be a smoke-free condominium. You may not be able to have pets because it's pet restricted. There's age restrictions. A lot of times, for example, in an over 55 community, let's say that they have a child or grandchild who's under 55 who needs to live with them for some period of time due to a health issue or a financial issue. If you read the documents very technically, they can't live there. They're not over 55. But good documents will have exceptions, and it'll lay out what the circumstances are, how long they can live there, if it has to be a renewed request, etc.
So let me ask you right now, since you're so precise in all of your wording and that's your job, obviously, but do you work with both individual condo unit owners and also with the associations, the whole condo, or just with one or the other?
We tend to represent the boards of the condominiums.
Right, so the whole condominium
For
complex.
the whole condominium. On occasion, you'll represent a unit owner. There may be a circumstance. The problem there is really one of size. A unit owner is like battling the great giant. I mean, it's one person against, 99 others maybe, represented by the board. And it's very hard to fiscally keep up with that in terms of the lawyer's fees, etc. So, but we will on occasion take a unit owner grievance.
Right. So I know that in this day and age of rules and regulations, we have to succumb to the rules of the federal government, the state, the town and city, And now, in addition, as a condo owner, you have to be under the rules of that condo complex as well, right?
Correct. And the rules and regulations can be as simple as where you can place your garbage, what you can put outside in your common area, that you just can't stack up stuff in the hallways outside your unit. And the rules and regulations will address that.
So as long as you're started in on this track, maybe you can tell us some of the common problems or issues that you represent, for example.
Many of the issues, believe it or not, right now are concern the Airbnb issue, whether or not the condominium will allow Airbnb short rentals.
And do they normally? Or?
No. Most condominiums, if they allow rentals at all, you have to have either a 6-month or 1-year rental. There has to be approval by the board of the tenant. The tenant has to sign an agreement that says, I will abide by the condominium's rules and regulations, even though I'm not a unit owner. And the unit owner has to agree that his tenant will abide by the rules and regulations, and if not, the unit owner will be responsible.
Well, I guess it's understandable. They don't want people coming and going all the time, and they want a stable community, but still, that's quite restrictive.
Yes, it is. And again, that Airbnbs are, especially if you have a condominium in a vacation area, the Cape, maybe a high-rise downtown Boston, and you're going to go away for a couple weeks, and you say, why not rent it out and I'll make some money and pay for my own vacation? So they're very attractive, but they're very restricted.
Right.
Other issues seem to be pets. All of a sudden, many dogs become service animals, whether legitimately or not, in order to get around a pet restriction. It may be a no-pet condominium.
Yeah, we had a funny instance, not so funny actually, in that I was representing a seller of a condo, and the buyer came in and said he had certification for his service animal. Well, he had the certification for the animal, but not for himself.
Correct. That's a very good point. You have to have both certification for the animal and a legitimate one. Not you can go online and get all certification
Which is
for
what
almost
he had.
anything.
Yeah.
But you have to have a one that's from a legitimate certifying agency that this is truly a service animal, and you have to have from a doctor that you need this service animal for whatever reason, emotional, physical, whatever the reason you need a service animal.
Okay. And then other issues, is there dues issue or assessments?
Lots of times people fall behind in their dues, and again, by the statute, it's a very interesting process that is very favorable to the condominium. If you fall more than 60 days in arrears of your paying your common fees, then the condominium, through a lawyer such as myself, will send you a letter at your cost that says you're more than 60 days past due. If you don't, within 30 days, become current, we'll take the next step. And the next step sometimes is they'll file a lawsuit. And what makes this very attractive to the condominium is that 6-month arrearage for condominium fees is prior to even the first mortgage. And it's a rolling lien.
So when you say prior to the first mortgage, meaning that they can foreclose on the property?
Yes, the condominium can foreclose on the property, take what's owed to them. The excess goes to either the first mortgagor or the unit owner if there's that much excess proceeds.
Yeah. You know, you were telling me a story before about a leak in a condo that came from someone upstairs, and then they were disputing it. Well, you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that? Because
there's two different ones. One, in fact, involves not a condominium, but a co-op. And they're very different animals.
You want to define?
A co-op is actually a cooperative that owns all the property. And you buy shares in the cooperative, which entitles you to what's called a proprietary lease. You basically become a tenant in your own building. And the lease sets forth what you can and cannot do and what you own.
For a particular space, though.
For a particular apartment or unit, right. And so the leak here was from above, the unit above. It caused fungus and mold in the unit below. And the dispute arose, who's responsible to demolish that kitchen because it was a health hazard and then restore it back to its state before it had mold.
Well, just from common sense, I would think it would have been the person upstairs who was responsible if it was their pipe.
Well, they disputed that it was their cause. The condominium says even if it came from us, you have a proprietary lease, and the lease says we're only responsible for a very small portion, in this case about 15% of the cost of restoration.
Oh my gosh.
I don't think that's the correct analysis, but that's one of the analyses. The most recent referral I just received had to do with, again, a leaky pipe from the common area into, and this is a condominium, into the unit, destroyed a lot of the unit, especially the flooring and walls, and they didn't deny that they were responsible, but they said, and we'll even submit the claim to the insurance company, but there's a $25,000 deductible that you're responsible for.
So, in other words, there's different kinds of insurance. There's insurance that you get as a homeowner for your space.
That's called an HO6.
Okay. And then there's the insurance for the whole condominium, common areas, et cetera.
Right. That's the master policy, which covers both casualty losses, personal injury, and so forth.
And you were saying that there was a deductible of $25,000 for the common area problems.
Well, there was a $25,000 deductible on the master policy. So this person who's got a destroyed unit well in excess of $25,000 says, condominium, fix the pipe and restore my unit. And they said, fine, but you're responsible for the first $25,000.
Oh my gosh.
Why? Because our documents say no matter what the cause of loss is, whether it's you or us, meaning the common elements, you are responsible for the $25,000 deductible.
Who are you representing in this mess?
I'm not representing the unit owner. And because I don't think that's an appropriate way to assess that deductible. It gets very technical as to how they did it. This is done through a fiat by the board. I'm not sure it can be enforced.
What is a fiat?
The board says you, unit owner, are going to pay the $25,000 deductible.
Like an executive order, executive decision?
It's not in the bylaws, it's not in the master
Oh, I
deed,
see.
it's not in the rules and regulations. It's a pronouncement from the board.
Right. And I would imagine nowadays with the legalization of marijuana, there's got to be some problems that arise because of that.
Absolutely. And they arose even before the legalization of marijuana. There was instances where medical marijuana was allowed. Smoke escapes and it migrates into other units. They complained, and that unit owner had to do all sorts of things to try to prohibit the migration of the smoke, and maybe even required to take medical marijuana in a non-smoking form.
Let me ask you, I know a lot of condo owners go in, they want to renovate, etc. Normally, do they have to ask the board if they can do that, or is their space their space?
To some degree, their space is their space, but many condominium documents have what's called an architectural integrity clause. So you can paint the walls whatever color you want. You can hang whatever pictures, mirrors you want. You can put in hardwood flooring or carpeting or linoleum if you want, but you can't change necessarily the window itself. It may have to be just the way it is. You may not be able to change your door to the condominium because that's, again, part of it is common area.
Facing outside.
Facing outside.
I see.
You may not be able to change the deck and close a deck. That's oftentimes a problem. Someone says, gee, I love my deck. I want to make it all season. I'm going to enclose it. No, you can't do that.
Right.
So.
And what happens if you have a neighbor who's making a lot of noise or has some sort of issue that bothers you?
You make a complaint to the board. Hopefully the board does something to enforce. Again, that's in the rules and regulations. that you can't play loud music beyond 10 p.m. at night, you can't have loud noise before 8 a.m., you can't have work done in your unit before 8 a.m. and not after 5 p.m., and you can be fined.
Right.
And that's part of the rules and regulations, is you will be fined.
So are you involved with any developments of condo complexes where you have to come up with these rules and regulations and with the deed, et cetera?
Yes, we do that all the time. We'll draft up master deeds and the bylaws, the rules and regulations, and we try, especially now, we try to make them as modern as possible. Some of these documents are 30, 40, 50 years old and don't anticipate some of the technological advances that have occurred and some of the living style changes that have been made. So yes, we all the time get asked to do that.
Well, certainly we put that phrase in there, all documents have to be reviewed by the buyer's attorney, precisely for this reason, so that you as an expert can go over these issues and, you know, foresee where there might be a chink in the armor,
right,
so to
and
speak.
Because a lot of times developers, you know, they may be very good guys in terms of developing a condominium, but they want to save money too, and they'll go get a pre-printed form, you know, master deed and declaration of trust, and they sometimes don't even change the wording, so it doesn't describe the condominium they have. They've just get a pre-printed form.
Oh, I see.
And you got to make sure that isn't the case when you're representing a buyer.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is, especially in this area, even a condo is a huge investment, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of investment.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And you see more and more of it as the boomers age and retire. Where are they going? They're going into condominiums. Millennials, young people, where are they going to get into the cycle? They'll buy a condominium and hope it appreciates in value so they can get the single family home. So we see a great upsurge in the purchase of condominiums.
Right. So we've talked about a few definitions. We only have a few seconds left. But I just wanted to ask you, what is the definition, in your opinion, of an apartment?
An apartment is you lease space from a landlord who owns everything, the fixtures, the appliances, the floors, the walls, the ceilings, and you have a right to live in it, but that's about it, and subject again to the provisions of the lease.
Great. Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough. I'm sorry we
This
ran
has
out
been
of
a
time.
pleasure.
How does someone get in touch with you if you know, they have a condo question?
Two easy ways. Call me at 617-557-4545 or email me at mark@schofieldlg, SCHOFIELD, LG.com.
Okay. Thanks a million.
Thank you.